This book was generated using Speaktor's AI voices. You can create human-like voiceovers in over 50 languages.
The summer of 1757 brought turmoil to the American frontier. The French and Indian War raged on, casting a shadow of uncertainty across the land. In this volatile atmosphere, two British sisters, Cora and Alice Munro, found themselves thrust into a perilous journey through the untamed wilderness of upstate New York. The forest loomed before them, a vast sea of green that seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, heavy with the promise of both adventure and danger. As they prepared to leave the relative safety of Fort Edward, the sisters' hearts raced with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. Cora, the elder of the two, sat tall in her saddle, her dark eyes scanning the tree line with a determined glint. Her fingers absently traced the intricate stitching of her riding gloves, a nervous habit she'd developed over the years. Alice, younger and more delicate, clung to her mount with white-knuckled hands, her fair skin already flushed from the anticipation of what lay ahead. Major Duncan Hayward, a young British officer, stood nearby, his gaze alternating between the sisters and the surrounding forest. His hand rested on the butt of his pistol, a constant reminder of the dangers that lurked in the shadows. Hayward's heart skipped a beat every time his eyes fell on Alice, a secret longing he dared not voice. "Are we ready to depart?" Cora's voice cut through the tension, steady and resolute. Hayward nodded, then turned to their guide. "Magua, lead the way." The Huron scout, his face an impassive mask, gave a curt nod. His piercing eyes lingered on the sisters for a moment, a flicker of something unreadable passing across his features. Without a word, he urged his horse forward, leading the group away from the fort's sturdy walls and into the unknown. As they rode, the forest seemed to swallow them whole. Thick underbrush snagged at their clothes, and low-hanging branches forced them to duck and weave. The rhythmic sound of hooves on soft earth was punctuated by the occasional snap of a twig or the startled cry of a bird taking flight. "This way safer," Magua grunted, gesturing towards a barely visible trail that veered off the main road. Hayward's brow furrowed, a seed of doubt taking root in his mind, but he nodded in acquiescence. The dense canopy above cast dappled shadows across their path, creating an ever-shifting landscape of light and dark. As they pressed on, the terrain grew increasingly treacherous. Swift streams cut across their path, the water frothing and churning around the horses' legs as they forded. The sound of rushing water mingled with the creak of saddle leather and the labored breathing of both humans and animals. Suddenly, Magua raised a hand, his body tensing like a coiled spring. In the distance, the faint sound of French voices carried on the wind. Hayward's hand flew to his pistol as Magua urgently ushered them into a dense thicket. They huddled there, barely daring to breathe, as a French patrol passed mere yards away. Alice buried her face in Cora's shoulder, her body trembling like a leaf in a storm. Cora wrapped an arm around her sister, her own heart pounding so loudly she feared it might give them away. The moment stretched on, taut as a bowstring, until finally the voices faded into the distance. As night began to fall, painting the sky in hues of deep purple and orange, the group found a small clearing to make camp. The forest seemed to come alive with unfamiliar sounds. The hoot of an owl, the rustle of unseen creatures in the underbrush. Each noise made Alice jump, her nerves frayed by the day's events. "Hush now," Cora murmured, her voice a soothing balm as she wrapped an arm around Alice's trembling shoulders. "We're safe here." But even as she spoke the words, her eyes met Hayward's across the clearing, and she saw her own uncertainty reflected there. As the others settled in for the night, Hayward took the first watch. He positioned himself at the edge of the clearing, his back to a large oak tree. The weight of his pistol was a comforting presence at his side as he peered into the inky darkness beyond their small circle of firelight. His mind raced with thoughts of the journey ahead, of the dangers that lurked unseen in the shadows, and of Alice's delicate face, now peaceful in sleep. With a deep breath, he steeled himself for the long night ahead, his hand never straying far from his weapon as he scanned the darkness for any sign of threat. As the night wore on, Hayward couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. Magua's earlier behavior, the unexpected detour, the close call with the French patrol, it all seemed too convenient. A chill ran down his spine as he recalled the unreadable look in the Huron's eyes when he gazed at the sisters. Just as exhaustion began to tug at his eyelids, a twig snapped in the darkness beyond the clearing. Hayward's head snapped up, his hand tightening on his pistol. As he squinted into the gloom, a shadow seemed to detach itself from the trees, moving with purpose towards their camp. With a start, Hayward realized it was Magua, returning from what should have been a routine scouting mission. But there was something different about the way he moved, a predatory grace that set Hayward's nerves on edge. As Magua stepped into the flickering firelight, Hayward's blood ran cold. The Huron's face was no longer an impassive mask, but twisted into a savage grin. In that moment, Hayward knew with chilling certainty that they had been betrayed. The real journey, it seemed, was only just beginning. As the journey progressed, Magua's true nature began to reveal itself. The group soon found themselves being led astray, deeper into hostile territory. The forest closed in around them like a living, breathing entity. Towering pines stretched endlessly skyward, their branches intertwining to form a canopy that blocked out most of the sunlight. The air hung heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, a constant reminder of the wilderness that surrounded them. Hayward's eyes darted nervously from tree to tree, searching for any familiar landmark. His heart sank as the realization hit him. They were in uncharted territory. The leaves rustled ominously overhead, as if whispering warnings of danger to come. "Magua," Hayward called out, his voice tight with suspicion and barely concealed fear. "Are you certain this is the right path?" The native guide turned slowly, his face an unreadable mask. "Magua knows the way," he replied, his voice as cold as ice. His dark eyes glinted with something that sent a shiver down Hayward's spine. Was it malice? Triumph? The tension in the air was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. Then, without warning, Magua melted into the shadows of the forest, his form disappearing as if he had never been there at all. The group was left alone, vulnerable in the vast wilderness. Panic spread through the party like wildfire. Alice, her face as pale as moonlight, began to tremble uncontrollably. "What's happening?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rustling leaves and the pounding of her own heart. Cora, ever the pillar of strength, wrapped a protective arm around her sister. "We'll be all right," she soothed, though her own eyes betrayed her fear. She could feel Alice's trembling against her side, and it took all her willpower to keep her own voice steady. With each passing moment, the forest seemed to grow darker, more menacing. Hope dwindled like the last embers of a dying fire, leaving only cold fear in its wake. Just as despair threatened to overwhelm them, the undergrowth parted, revealing three unexpected figures. The first to emerge was a man whose very presence commanded attention. Lean and weathered, with eyes as sharp as a hawk's, he carried himself with the easy confidence of one who knew the wilderness like the back of his hand. This was Natty Bumppo, known far and wide as Hawkeye for his legendary marksmanship. Flanking him were two Native Americans, their movements as fluid and silent as mountain streams. The older of the two, Chingachgook, carried the wisdom of ages in his stoic features. Beside him stood his son, Uncas, young and strong, his eyes alive with curiosity as they fell upon the stranded group. Hawkeye's gaze swept over the party, assessing their situation in an instant. "Seems you folks have found yourselves in a bit of trouble," he said, his voice gruff but not unkind. The simple words were like a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. Relief washed over the group like a cool breeze on a sweltering day. Hayward stepped forward, hope rekindling in his chest. "Can you help us?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly. "We're trying to reach Fort William Henry." A knowing look passed between Hawkeye and his companions. "Aye, we can help," he nodded. "But first you should know the truth about your guide." As they set off through the forest, Hawkeye explained Magua's betrayal, his allegiance to the French, and his vendetta against Colonel Monroe. The news hit the group like a physical blow, the realization of how close they'd come to disaster sinking in like a stone in a still pond. Hawkeye led them through the wilderness with the ease of a man walking through his own backyard. He showed them hidden trails and secret paths, his keen eyes always alert for signs of danger. Under his guidance, the forest, which had seemed so threatening before, now felt almost welcoming. As they traveled, Uncas found himself drawn to Cora. Their eyes met often, a silent understanding growing between them. Meanwhile, Hawkeye shared his vast knowledge of the land with the group, teaching them how to move quietly, how to read the signs of the forest, and how to survive in this harsh but beautiful world. The peace was shattered when they stumbled upon a French scouting party. In a heartbeat, the forest erupted into chaos. Gunshots cracked through the air like thunder, the acrid smell of gunpowder mixing with the earthy scent of the woods. Hawkeye and the Mohicans moved like shadows, their actions a deadly dance of precision and skill. Hayward watched in awe as Hawkeye lived up to his name, each shot finding its mark with uncanny accuracy. The skirmish was brief but intense, leaving the French scouts scattered and the forest once again silent. As the group continued their journey, the bonds between them grew stronger. Uncas and Cora's connection deepened, their stolen glances speaking volumes. Hawkeye's lessons in wilderness survival became a welcome distraction from the dangers that lurked around them, his stories of life on the frontier painting a vivid picture of a world both harsh and beautiful. The forest whispered its secrets to those who knew how to listen, and under Hawkeye's tutelage, the group began to hear its voice. They learned to move with the land rather than against it, each step bringing them closer to safety and to a deeper understanding of the wild, untamed heart of the frontier. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Hawkeye suddenly raised his hand, signaling the group to stop. His eyes narrowed as he scanned the horizon. In the distance, barely visible through the trees, they could make out the outline of a structure. Fort William Henry, Hawkeye murmured, his voice tinged with both relief and apprehension. But as they drew closer, the air grew thick with an acrid smell. Smoke rose in dark plumes above the treetops, and the distant sound of gunfire echoed through the forest. The fort, their long-awaited sanctuary, was under siege. The group's journey had been arduous, marked by days of travel through enemy-infested territory. Finally, after countless close calls and narrow escapes, they caught sight of Fort William Henry. As they crested the hill, the fort materialized before them, a stark silhouette against the blood-red sky. The air was thick with the acrid stench of gunpowder, mingling with the earthy scent of upturned soil. Smoke billowed from the ramparts, twisting like angry serpents in the evening breeze. The constant boom of cannon fire echoed through the valley, each blast sending tremors through the ground beneath their feet. Cora's heart pounded in her chest as she surveyed the treacherous no-man's land, stretching between them and safety. Bullets whizzed past like angry hornets, their high-pitched whine a constant reminder of the danger that surrounded them. "Stay low and move fast," Hawkeye whispered, his eyes darting across the terrain. "We'll make for that cluster of trees to the east." They darted from cover to cover, bodies tense with each exposed dash. The ground was uneven, littered with debris and pockmarked by artillery fire. Alice stumbled once, her ankle twisting on a hidden root. Hayward's strong arm caught her, pulling her behind a fallen log just as a cannonball whistled overhead. So close they felt the rush of air in its wake. Finally, they reached the fort's gates. The sentry's challenge was barely audible over the din of battle, but Hayward's crisp response saw them quickly ushered inside. The scene within the fort was one of organized chaos. Soldiers rushed to and fro, their faces streaked with sweat and grime. The air was heavy with the metallic tang of blood and the groans of the wounded. Cora's stomach churned at the sight, but she steeled herself, knowing their ordeal was far from over. Suddenly, a cry rang out. "Father!" Cora and Alice's voices blended as one as they spotted Colonel Monroe. The girls rushed into their father's arms, tears of relief and joy streaming down their faces. Monroe held his daughters tight, his weathered face a mix of joy and worry. "My girl," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank God you're safe." As the reunion unfolded, Hayward couldn't help but notice the strain etched on Monroe's face. The colonel's eyes were sunken, his uniform rumpled and stained. The weight of command hung heavy on his shoulders, visible in every line of his face. Once the initial emotion subsided, Monroe ushered them into his makeshift war room. Maps and dispatches littered a rough-hewn table, illuminated by guttering candles that cast long, dancing shadows on the walls. "The situation is grim," Monroe admitted, his finger tracing the French lines on the map. "Montcalm has us surrounded. Our supplies are running low, and morale is faltering." Hayward leaned in, studying the map intently. "Any word from General Webb, sir?" Monroe shook his head, a flicker of frustration crossing his face. "Nothing yet. We're holding out hope for reinforcements, but—" His voice trailed off, leaving the dire implications hanging in the air like a shroud. In the days that followed, each member of the group found their place within the besieged fort. Cora, her face set with determination, rolled up her sleeves and dove into work at the makeshift hospital. Her gentle touch and soothing words brought comfort to the wounded and dying, even as the constant influx of injured threatened to overwhelm her. Alice, though shaken by their ordeal, refused to give in to despair. She organized small gatherings in the evenings, her clear voice rising in song, a balm to the weary souls of the soldiers. For a few precious moments each night, the men could forget the horrors that awaited them outside the fort's walls, losing themselves in the beauty of her melodies. Hawkeye and the Mohicans proved invaluable to the fort's defense. They slipped in and out of the wilderness like ghosts, their movements fluid and silent as shadows. Their daring raids became the stuff of legend among the British troops, sparking hope in even the darkest hours. As the siege wore on, the bonds between the newcomers and the fort's defenders grew stronger. They were united in their struggle against a common enemy, their fates intertwined in the crucible of war. Yet even as they fought and hoped, the shadow of uncertainty loomed. Would help arrive in time, or would Fort William Henry fall, leaving them at the mercy of their foes? In quiet moments, Cora found herself drawn to the ramparts, gazing out at the enemy lines. The flicker of French campfires in the distance seemed to mock their predicament, a constant reminder of the danger that surrounded them. But as she felt the solid stone beneath her hands and heard the determined voices of the soldiers behind her, a fierce resolve took hold. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. As night fell on the 7th day of the siege, an eerie quiet settled over the fort. The constant bombardment that had become their grim lullaby suddenly ceased, leaving an unsettling silence in its wake. Cora exchanged worried glances with Hayward as they made their way to Colonel Monroe's quarters. Something had changed, and the air was thick with foreboding. As they pushed open the door, the look on Monroe's face confirmed their worst fears. The situation within Fort William Henry had taken a dire turn, and the coming dawn promised to bring with it a reckoning none of them were prepared to face. The situation within Fort William Henry had grown increasingly desperate. As the siege intensified, the defenders found themselves in a dire predicament. The air hung heavy with the acrid stench of gunpowder and the metallic tang of blood. Smoke billowed across the fort, obscuring the sun and casting an eerie pall over the beleaguered defenders. The relentless bombardment of French artillery shook the very foundations of the fort, each impact sending tremors through the ground and showering debris upon the huddled soldiers. Colonel Monroe stood atop the ramparts, his weathered face a mask of grim determination. Sweat mingled with soot on his brow as he surveyed the chaos below. The once proud walls of the fort now resembled a patchwork quilt of hastily repaired breaches and crumbling stonework. "Shore up that western wall," Monroe bellowed, his voice barely audible above the din of battle. "And for God's sake, keep those guns firing." The colonel's words galvanized his men into action. Soldiers scrambled to reinforce the weakening defenses, their hands raw and bleeding from handling rough stone and splintered wood. The air rang with the cacophony of hammers and saws as repair crews worked feverishly to patch the gaping holes left by enemy fire. Days bled into weeks, and the toll of the siege became increasingly apparent. The fort's storehouse, once a symbol of plenty, now stood as a stark reminder of their dwindling resources. Dust gathered on empty shelves where barrels of salted meat and sacks of flour had once been stacked high. Water, more precious than gold, was rationed with agonizing care, each sip barely enough to wet parched throats. In this crucible of hardship, disease found fertile ground. The infirmary, a place of healing, had become a chamber of horrors. The air was thick with the stench of festering wounds and the piteous moans of the dying. Dr. Wheelock, the fort surgeon, moved among the rows of makeshift cots, his once pristine coat now stained with blood and worse. His eyes, sunken with exhaustion, held a haunted look as he fought a losing battle against infection and fever. Under the cover of darkness, Hawkeye and the Mohicans emerged as the fort's silent guardians. They slipped beyond the walls like wraiths, their movements fluid and purposeful. These nighttime forays into enemy territory were fraught with danger, but they returned with vital intelligence and disrupted French supply lines, buying precious time for the beleaguered defenders. Hope, that most fragile of emotions, flickered to life when word arrived of a message from General Webb. Soldiers and civilians alike gathered, their faces alight with desperate anticipation. But as Colonel Monroe read the dispatch, his shoulders sagged visibly, and a collective groan rippled through the crowd. No help was coming. They stood alone against the might of the French army. The realization settled over the fort like a funeral shroud. Monroe, his proud bearing now bent under the weight of responsibility, called his officers to council. The debate raged long into the night, voices rising and falling as they grappled with their dire situation. "We cannot hold out much longer," Major Hayward argued, his young face haggard with fatigue. "Our walls are breached, our supplies exhausted. We must consider the lives of those under our protection." Monroe's weathered hands clenched into fists as he paced the room, the floorboards creaking beneath his heavy steps. "To surrender is to admit defeat," he growled, but the fire in his eyes had dimmed to embers. As dawn broke, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold that seemed to mock their plight, Monroe emerged from his quarters. His decision was etched in the lines of his face, a mixture of resignation and resolve. With a heavy heart, he dispatched an envoy to General Montcalm, requesting terms of surrender. The French commander, impressed by the British resolve, offered generous terms. "You and your men have fought with valor," Montcalm declared, his voice tinged with respect. "I offer safe passage for all to Fort Edward." Within the fort, a flurry of activity erupted as the British prepared for their retreat. Wagons creaked under the weight of what meager supplies remained, and the wounded were carefully transferred onto makeshift stretchers, their cries of pain a somber counterpoint to the bustle around them. Amidst the chaos, Hawkeye and the Mohicans moved with quiet urgency, their keen eyes scanning the tree line beyond the fort's walls. "Something's not right," Chingachgook murmured, his weathered face creased with concern. "The forest holds many secrets, and not all of them friendly." Hawkeye nodded grimly, his hand instinctively tightening on his rifle. "We'd best keep our wits about us. This journey's far from over." But their warnings fell on deaf ears as the British column formed up, eager to put the horrors of the siege behind them. As the gates of Fort William Henry creaked open for the last time, a palpable sense of unease settled over the departing soldiers and civilians. They marched into the dense forest, unaware of the watchful eyes that followed their every move. The trees seemed to close in around them, branches reaching out like grasping fingers. The air grew thick with tension, and an eerie silence fell over the column. Hawkeye's eyes darted from shadow to shadow, his instincts screaming danger. Suddenly a twig snapped in the underbrush. Hawkeye whirled, his rifle at the ready, but saw only the endless green of the forest. As the last of the British column disappeared around a bend in the trail, a low, menacing growl echoed through the trees. The ambush was set, and the unsuspecting British were marching straight into its jaws. The British column departed from Fort William Henry, a mix of soldiers, women, and children. They moved under the promised protection of the French, unaware of the terror that awaited them. As they entered a narrow wooded passage, the air grew thick with tension. The dense forest loomed on either side, its shadows concealing unseen dangers. Sunlight filtered through the canopy, dappling the ground with patches of gold, a stark contrast to the darkness that was about to unfold. The peaceful rustling of leaves was suddenly shattered by a cacophony of war cries and gunfire. Magua and his Huron warriors, who had been lying in wait like coiled vipers, sprang their trap. The forest erupted into chaos, gun smoke filling the air, and mingling with the acrid scent of fear. The British, caught off guard and weighed down by their baggage and wounded, found themselves in a nightmare. Soldiers scrambled to form defensive lines, their red coats stark against the green foliage. But they were cut down like wheat before a scythe by the swift and merciless Huron warriors. The sound of metal clashing against metal rang out, punctuated by the sharp cracks of musket fire and the dull thuds of bodies hitting the forest floor. Women clutched their children close, their screams piercing the air as they fled in panic. Many fell victim to the attackers, their bodies crumpling to the forest floor like discarded dolls. The once orderly column had devolved into a frenzied mass of terror and confusion. The ground beneath their feet, once solid and reassuring, now seemed to shift and buckle with each step, as if the very earth was trying to swallow them whole. Amidst the mayhem, Magua's eyes locked onto his true targets: Cora, Alice, and Hayward. Like a wolf singling out the weakest members of a herd, he and his men pushed through the chaos towards them. Hayward's face was a mask of determination, sweat beading on his brow as he fought valiantly. His pistol barked and his sword flashed in the dappled sunlight as he fended off multiple attackers. But even his courage couldn't withstand the overwhelming odds forever. Colonel Monroe, separated from his daughters in the swirling melee, felt a father's desperation clawing at his chest. He rallied a small group of soldiers, their faces etched with grim resolve. "To me, men!" he roared above the din, his voice hoarse with emotion. "We must reach my daughters." They fought like demons, but the tide of battle swept them further away from their goal. Each step forward met with 2 steps back. Hawkeye and the Mohicans, who had been scouting ahead, heard the commotion. The forest seemed to bend before them as they raced back, their hearts pounding with urgency. The familiar woodland paths, once a source of comfort, now felt like a maze designed to keep them from their friends. But even their legendary speed couldn't outpace the swift brutality of the attack. They arrived to find a scene of utter devastation, the ground slick with blood, and the air heavy with the moans of the dying. The once vibrant woodland had become a graveyard, littered with the dead and dying. It was a scene that would haunt the survivors for years to come, a tragic testament to the brutality of war. The French honor-bound protectors turned helpless witnesses, arrived too late to prevent the massacre. Their faces paled at the carnage before them, a stark reminder of war's cruel unpredictability. They watched, impotent with shock, as the Hurons melted back into the forest with their captives, leaving behind a trail of destruction and broken promises. As the last echoes of battle faded, an eerie quiet settled over the forest. The air, once filled with the sounds of combat, now hung heavy with the weight of loss and the metallic tang of spilled blood. Hawkeye, Chingachgook, and Uncas stood amidst the aftermath, their faces etched with a mix of sorrow and determination. They surveyed the carnage, each silently vowing to rescue their companions and seek justice for the fallen. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the blood-stained ground. The 3 men set their jaws and prepared for the difficult journey ahead. Their quest for vengeance and rescue had only just begun. As they took their first steps into the gathering darkness, the forest around them seemed to hold its breath, the usual chorus of birdsong and rustling leaves muted by the gravity of the moment. What dangers lay ahead in the shadows? What unseen eyes watched their every move? The answers lay hidden in the depths of the forest, waiting to be uncovered. The forest seemed to hold its breath, the usual chorus of birdsong and rustling leaves muted by the gravity of the moment. Hawkeye's weathered hands brushed aside branches, his keen eyes scanning the ground for signs invisible to most. The scent of pine and damp earth filled their nostrils, a stark reminder of the vast, untamed land they traversed. "There," Uncas whispered, pointing to a barely discernible depression in the soft earth. "They passed this way not long ago." Chingachgook nodded, his face a mask of concentration. The trio moved like shadows through the wilderness, their footsteps silent as ghosts. They were a study in contrast: Hawkeye's lean, weather-beaten form, Chingachgook's powerful, seasoned presence, and Uncas's lithe, youthful energy. As they pressed on, the forest grew denser, the light filtering through the canopy in dappled patterns. Every so often they'd pause, listening intently for any sound that might betray their quarry's presence. The air was thick with tension, each rustle of leaves and snap of twigs a potential clue or threat. Their path led them to a rushing river, its waters churning and frothing over jagged rocks. Without a word they began to cross, the icy water biting at their legs. Hawkeye stumbled on a slippery stone, but Chingachgook's strong hand steadied him, a wordless reminder of their unbreakable bond. As they scaled a steep cliff face, Fingers grasping for purchase on the rough stone, they encountered other survivors from the massacre. Among them was Colonel Monroe, his once proud bearing now bent with grief and worry for his daughters. His eyes, red-rimmed and haunted, met Hawkeye's. "We'll find them, Colonel," Hawkeye assured him, his voice low but filled with conviction. "We'll bring them back." The expanded group pushed on, their determination fueled by desperation and hope. They moved like a well-oiled machine, each member playing their part. Uncas took point, his youthful vigor and sharp senses proving invaluable as he picked up even the faintest trails. Their progress was suddenly halted in a rocky area, the hard ground refusing to yield any clues. The group split up, tension mounting as precious minutes ticked by. It was Uncas who finally spotted a crucial sign, a scrap of fabric caught on a thorny bush, unmistakably from Alice's dress. "This way," he called, his voice tight with excitement and worry. As they pressed deeper into Huron territory, the danger grew palpable. Every shadow seemed to hide an enemy, every bird call a potential signal. They moved with increased stealth, their bodies low to the ground, communicating with hand signals and meaningful glances. A French patrol nearly discovered them, the sound of marching feet and clanking equipment growing alarmingly close. With hearts pounding, they took shelter in a dank cave, pressed against the cold stone as they held their breath. The patrol passed by, oblivious to the desperate group hiding mere feet away. Hawkeye and Chingachgook, drawing on years of experience and an almost supernatural understanding of their foes, began to anticipate Magua's movements. They pictured the cunning Huron in their minds, trying to think as he would, to predict his next move. "He'll be heading for the old Huron village," Chingachgook murmured, his dark eyes distant as he recalled ancient tribal knowledge. "It's defensible, and he'll have allies there." The group pushed on, their bodies aching, muscles screaming for rest. But they knew that every moment counted, that the lives of Cora, Alice, and Hayward hung in the balance. The forest blurred around them as they raced against time, each step bringing them closer to their goal and to whatever dark fate Magua had planned for his captives. As night began to fall, casting long shadows through the trees, they pressed on. Their determination burned like a fire in the growing darkness, driving them forward despite exhaustion and fear. They were a force of nature, unstoppable in their pursuit, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead to rescue their friends from Magua's clutches. The moon rose high in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the forest. Hawkeye's keen eyes spotted a faint wisp of smoke in the distance. His heart raced as he realized they were closing in on their quarry. But as they crept closer, a blood-curdling scream pierced the night air, sending chills down their spines. Was it Cora? Alice? Or had they stumbled upon something far more sinister than they could have imagined? The relentless pursuit had stretched on for days, pushing Hawkeye and his companions to their limits. Their determination finally paid off as they tracked Magua to a Huron village nestled deep in the wilderness. The forest air hung heavy with the scent of pine and damp earth as Hawkeye crouched behind a thick curtain of foliage. His keen eyes scanned the bustling village below, taking in every detail. Smoke from cooking fires curled lazily into the air, mingling with the chatter of daily life. But beneath this veneer of normalcy, tension simmered like a pot about to boil over. Hawkeye's heart raced, knowing that inside those rough-hewn lodges, Cora, Alice, and Hayward were held captive. Their fates hung by a thread as Magua conferred with the Huron elders. The weight of responsibility pressed down on Hawkeye's shoulders, making each breath feel like a struggle. He turned to his companions, his voice barely above a whisper. "We need a way in, something they won't expect." The words tasted bitter in his mouth, the frustration of their predicament threatening to overwhelm him. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the village, inspiration struck like a bolt of lightning. Hawkeye's weathered face broke into a sly grin. "A French medicine man," he mused, hope flickering in his eyes. "Now that's something they might just welcome." With meticulous care, Hawkeye transformed himself. Mud streaked his face, herbs adorned his clothes, and he adopted the shuffling gait of an elderly healer. His heart pounded beneath his disguise, Each beat a silent prayer for success. The ruse worked like a charm. Soon Hawkeye found himself moving freely among the Hurons, his ears pricked for any scrap of information about the captives. The words he overheard chilled him to the bone. Magua's plans were as dark as the approaching night. A forced marriage for Cora, torture for Hayward, and Alice to be sold like cattle. As darkness fell, the village grew quiet. The crackle of fires and the occasional howl of a distant wolf were the only sounds that broke the eerie stillness. Hawkeye knew it was time to act. With the stealth of a shadow, he slipped into the lodge where Alice and Hayward were held. Their eyes widened in recognition as he cut their bonds, pressing a finger to his lips. They crept through the village like ghosts, every snapping twig a thunderclap in their ears. The night air was thick with tension, making it hard to breathe. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. A commotion erupted from another lodge. Magua had discovered their deception. In the chaos that followed, he vanished into the night with Cora, her muffled cries fading into the darkness like a dying ember. Uncas and Chingachgook sprang into action, creating a diversion that sent the Huron warriors scrambling. Hawkeye seized the moment, urging Alice and Hayward toward the tree line. "Run!" he hissed, his voice raw with urgency. "Don't look back!" They plunged into the forest, the angry shouts of their pursuers nipping at their heels. The woods came alive around them, branches clawing at their clothes, roots threatening to trip them at every step. But this was Hawkeye's element. He led them through the labyrinth of trees with unerring precision, using every trick he knew to throw off their hunters. The night wore on. A deadly game of cat and mouse played out beneath the indifferent stars. Hawkeye's chest burned with exertion, but a fire of determination burned even hotter. Cora was still out there, in Magua's clutches. The thought of her in danger fueled his every step. As the first pale fingers of dawn crept across the sky, they finally found a moment to catch their breath. Huddled in a dense thicket, the ragged group exchanged glances of mingled relief and worry. They had escaped, but at a terrible cost. Hawkeye's voice was rough with emotion as he spoke. "We'll find her," he vowed, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "Magua won't give up easily, but neither will we." The others nodded, drawing strength from his resolve. With the immediate danger past, they allowed themselves a brief respite. But Hawkeye knew their journey was far from over. As the forest stirred to life around them, he began to plan their next move. The chase would continue deeper into the wilderness, with Cora's life hanging in the balance. As the group prepared to move on, Hawkeye felt a sudden, overwhelming surge of emotion. The weight of their mission, the lives at stake, and the treacherous path ahead all crashed down upon him at once. He clenched his fists, his knuckles turning white with the intensity of his grip. A fire burned in his eyes, matching the inferno raging in his heart. In that moment, he knew with absolute certainty that he would stop at nothing to save Cora and bring Magua to justice. The hunt was far from over. It had only just begun. Hawkeye's heart burned with an unquenchable fire. His determination to rescue Cora consumed him, driving him to craft a daring new plan. The forest whispered secrets as Hawkeye prepared for his perilous mission. Dappled sunlight filtered through the canopy, casting shifting shadows that mirrored the scout's racing thoughts. With practiced hands, he meticulously disguised himself as a French courier. Each adjustment to his clothing, a step closer to his dangerous deception. As he worked, French phrases tumbled from his lips in a low murmur, his tongue wrapping around the unfamiliar sounds. The woods seemed to hold its breath, the usual chorus of birdsong and rustling leaves fading to an expectant hush. "Stay hidden," Hawkeye urged his companions, his eyes glinting with a mix of determination and worry. "But be ready for anything." The weight of unspoken fears hung heavy in the air, each member of the group acutely aware of the razor's edge they walked. With a final resolute nod, Hawkeye strode towards the Huron camp. His heart thundered in his chest, a stark contrast to his outwardly calm demeanor. As he entered the camp, the acrid tang of wood smoke stung his nostrils, mingling with the earthy scent of unwashed bodies and cooking meat. Hawkeye's keen gaze darted from face to face, reading the subtle shifts in expression and body language of the Hurons. He moved with purposeful confidence, his fabricated messages from French command a shield against suspicion. The negotiations were a delicate dance, each word carefully chosen and delivered. Hawkeye spun tales of Cora's importance, painting vivid pictures of rewards and favor that awaited the Hurons. But beneath his smooth words, a current of desperation threatened to break through. As the minutes ticked by, the atmosphere in the camp shifted. Where there had been curiosity, now suspicion took root. Hawkeye felt the change like a physical blow, his skin prickling with the weight of hostile stares. In a heartbeat, the charade crumbled. An accusation rang out, sharp as a gunshot, and chaos erupted. Warriors converged on Hawkeye, their faces twisted with rage and betrayal. Time seemed to slow as adrenaline flooded his system. With the fluid grace of a cornered predator, Hawkeye sprang into action. He ducked and weaved through the swarming mass of bodies, each movement a calculated risk. The world narrowed to a blur of motion and instinct, the thundering of his pulse drowning out the angry shouts that filled the air. Against all odds, Hawkeye broke free. He ran as if the very hounds of hell were at his heels, the forest a green blur around him. His lungs burned, muscles screaming in protest as he pushed himself to his limits. Relief washed over him as he spotted his companions, their faces etched with worry and fear. Without a word, they fell in beside him, their escape a symphony of pounding hearts and labored breaths. As they put distance between themselves and the Huron camp, the bitter taste of failure settled in Hawkeye's mouth. Cora was still in Magua's clutches, and time was running out. The weight of their predicament settled over the group like a suffocating blanket, each step taking them further from their goal, but no closer to a solution. Exhaustion began to take its toll as they pushed deeper into the wilderness. The forest seemed to close in around them, branches reaching out like grasping fingers. The air grew thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, the occasional cry of a distant bird breaking the eerie silence. Suddenly, Hawkeye froze, his hands shooting up in a signal to halt. His eyes widened as he caught sight of something in the distance, something that made his blood run cold. The forest seemed to close in around them, branches reaching out like grasping fingers as Hawkeye and his companions pushed deeper into the wilderness. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, punctuated by the occasional cry of a distant bird. Their muscles ached with every step, a constant reminder of the perilous journey that lay behind them and the uncertain path ahead. Nature itself appeared to conspire against their mission. Raging rivers roared in their path, the water frothing and churning like a cauldron of angry spirits. Treacherous cliffs loomed overhead, their jagged faces a daunting obstacle that seemed to mock their efforts. The dense, uncharted forests stretched as far as the eye could see, a sea of green that threatened to swallow them whole. As they trudged on, hunger gnawed at their bellies like a relentless beast. It was a constant, nagging presence that reminded them of the harsh realities of life in this untamed land. Hawkeye and the Mohicans, their senses honed by years in the wilderness, took on the vital task of providing for the group. They moved like shadows through the underbrush, their keen eyes spotting game, where others saw only a blur of leaves and branches. The crack of Hawkeye's rifle shattered the forest's silence, followed by triumphant cries that echoed through the trees. Each successful hunt was a small victory, a moment of respite in their relentless pursuit. Days blurred into nights as they tracked Magua with unwavering focus. The trail led them deeper into unknown territory, to the lands of the Delaware tribe. Hawkeye's face grew grim as he recognized the markers, his brow furrowing with concern. "We must tread carefully here," he warned, his voice low and serious. The others gathered close, hanging on his every word. "The Delaware are proud and independent. One wrong move could turn them against us, and our mission would be lost." The weight of their quest seemed to press down on them like a physical force as they approached the outskirts of the Delaware village. Their clothes were tattered, their bodies bruised and battered from the journey, yet a fire still burned in their eyes, fueled by the hope of rescuing Cora and bringing Magua to justice. Suddenly, the forest around them came alive. Delaware warriors materialized from behind trees and rocks, their weapons drawn and faces painted for war. The air crackled with tension, thick enough to cut with a knife. Neither group moved, locked in a silent standoff that seemed to stretch for an eternity. Hawkeye stepped forward, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. Drawing upon his knowledge of Native American customs and languages, he addressed the warriors in their own tongue. His words were carefully chosen, a delicate dance of diplomacy in this potentially explosive situation. "We come as peaceful visitors seeking justice," Hawkeye declared, his voice steady and respectful despite the hammering of his heart. "We ask for an audience with your chiefs to present our case against a great evil that threatens us all." The Delaware warriors exchanged glances, their suspicion evident in their narrowed eyes and white-knuckled grips on their weapons. For a moment it seemed as if violence might erupt at any second. The forest itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the outcome of this tense encounter. Then slowly, almost imperceptibly, the tension began to ease. A tall warrior, his face lined with the wisdom of years, nodded solemnly. "We will hear your word," he said, his voice deep and resonant like distant thunder. "Follow us to the village." As they were escorted into the heart of the Delaware settlement, Hawkeye and his companions found themselves thrust into a complex web of tribal politics and ancient customs. The air was thick with the smell of wood smoke and the murmur of curious onlookers. Children peeked out from behind their mothers' skirts, wide-eyed at the sight of the strangers in their midst. The group exchanged meaningful glances, each acutely aware of the gravity of their situation. They had come seeking allies in their quest to rescue Cora, but now found themselves walking a precarious tightrope. One misstep here could not only doom their mission, but potentially ignite a conflict that would engulf the entire region. As they approached the central gathering place where the chiefs awaited them, Hawkeye took a deep breath, steadying his nerves. The fate of Cora, and perhaps much more, now rested on their ability to navigate the intricate social and political structures of the Delaware tribe. With determination in their hearts and hope in their eyes, they prepared to plead their case. The weight of their words, the passion in their voices, the fire in their eyes, all of it would need to come together perfectly if they were to succeed. As they stepped into the circle of Delaware elders, the air seemed to thicken with anticipation. Hawkeye opened his mouth to speak, the first words of their plea on his lips. But before he could utter a sound, a commotion erupted at the edge of the gathering. All eyes turned to see a figure stumbling into the clearing, bloodied and gasping for breath. It was a Delaware scout, his eyes wide with fear as he croaked out a single, chilling word. "Magua." The group stands before the Delaware Council, their faces etched with determination. They present their case with earnest conviction, hoping to sway the tribal elders. The air in the council chamber is thick with tension, heavy as a storm cloud ready to burst. Hawkeye's weathered hands clench and unclench at his sides, his eyes darting between the stoic faces of the Delaware chiefs. Beside him, Uncas stands tall, his posture rigid, but his eyes alive with a fire that speaks of his unwavering resolve. Suddenly, a ripple of recognition passes through the gathering. One of the Delaware elders, his face a map of wrinkles carved by time and wisdom, fixes his gaze on Uncas. The old man's eyes widen, as if seeing a ghost from the past step into the present. "By the spirits," the elder breathes, his voice cracking with emotion. "This young warrior, he bears the blood of the great Mohican chiefs." The announcement falls like a stone in still water, sending waves of murmurs through the assembled crowd. The air shifts, charged with a new energy as the Delaware, known for their deep respect for the Mohican lineage, regard Uncas with newfound reverence. Sensing the change, Uncas steps forward. His movements are fluid, graceful as a deer emerging from the forest shadows. When he speaks, his voice carries the weight of generations past and the fire of his own convictions. "Honored elders," Uncas begins, his words painting vivid pictures in the minds of his listeners. "I stand before you not just as a warrior, but as a son of the Mohican people. Our blood runs deep in these lands, as does our bond with the Delaware." As Uncas weaves his tale, speaking of the injustices committed by Magua and the dire consequences that hang in the balance, the Delaware chiefs lean in, captivated. His words resonate in their hearts like the beat of a distant drum, stirring memories of ancient alliances and shared struggles. Hope, fragile as morning mist, begins to form in the hearts of Hawkeye and his companions. They can feel the tide of opinion turning, the respect earned by Uncas's words and bearing, shifting the balance in their favor. But fate, ever capricious, has other plans. Just as victory seems within reach, a commotion erupts at the edge of the village. All eyes turn to see Magua, the cunning Huron, striding into view. His face is a mask of determination, his eyes glinting with a dangerous light. The atmosphere changes in an instant. The air crackles with tension, like the moment before lightning strikes. Magua, well versed in the ways of tribal politics, wastes no time in making his demand. His voice, smooth as oil, yet sharp as a blade, cuts through the murmurs of the crowd. "Great chiefs of the Delaware," Magua calls out, his words carefully chosen. "I come to claim what is rightfully mine by the ancient laws that bind our peoples. The woman, Cora, belongs to me." His words fall like hammer blows, each one driving home the weight of tradition and obligation. The Delaware elders exchange troubled glances, caught between their respect for tribal law and the stirring of their conscience. The village transforms into an arena of wits and words. Arguments fly back and forth like arrows in battle, each side presenting their case with passion and cunning. Magua, like a spider weaving its web, reminds the Delaware of their obligations and the dire consequences of defying long-standing agreements. As the debate rages on, Uncas and Hawkeye watch with growing desperation. They know that more than just Cora's fate hangs in the balance. The very course of the conflict could be decided here and now. Their minds race, searching for a way to tip the scales in their favor. The sun begins its descent, casting long shadows across the village. The tension reaches a fever pitch as the Delaware chiefs sit in solemn contemplation, their faces etched with the weight of their impending decision. They are torn between two paths, each fraught with its own perils. Uncas and Hawkeye exchange a look of grim determination. Time is running short. With one last surge of desperate energy, they prepare to make their final appeal to the wisdom and compassion of the Delaware elders. But as they step forward, ready to lay everything on the line, a hush falls over the gathering. The eldest of the Delaware chiefs rises slowly to his feet, his eyes heavy with the burden of judgment. The fate of Cora, and perhaps the future of nations, hangs on his next words. The chief opens his mouth to speak, and the world seems to hold its breath. The Delaware elders, bound by the complexities of tribal law and ancient alliances, ultimately sided with Magua despite Uncas's revelation and the group's impassioned pleas. This decision, rooted in tradition and obligation, forced Hawkeye and his companions to take drastic action. A heavy silence fell over the group as the reality of their situation sank in. The air grew thick with tension, like the stillness before a storm. Hawkeye's weathered face hardened, his eyes darting between his companions. Without a word, they understood. This was their final chance to rescue Cora. As Magua prepared to leave with his captive, the forest seemed to hold its breath. Leaves rustled uneasily in the breeze, as if nature itself sensed the impending conflict. Hawkeye and his friends moved with quiet urgency, gathering their weapons and supplies. The familiar weight of their muskets and the cool touch of their knife handles brought a grim comfort. Uncas took the lead, his face a mask of determination. His eyes, usually warm and expressive, now burned with a fierce intensity. The young warrior's movements were fluid and purposeful, each step carrying the weight of his people's legacy and his own heart's desire. The chase began, and the forest came alive with their pursuit. Feet pounded against the earth, matching the frantic rhythm of their hearts. The trees seemed to close in, branches reaching out like grasping fingers, alternately hindering and concealing their passage. The air filled with the scent of crushed leaves and sweat, mingling with the earthy smell of the forest floor. As they pressed on, the terrain grew treacherous. Dense forest gave way to steep ravines, the ground crumbling beneath their feet like sand through an hourglass. Fast-flowing rivers cut across their path, the icy water shocking their systems as they forded across. The cold bite of the water served as a stark reminder of the harsh realities they faced. Hawkeye and Chingachgook, seasoned trackers, employed all their skills to keep pace. Their senses were on high alert, eyes scanning for broken twigs and disturbed earth, ears straining for any unnatural sound. The forest, once a familiar friend, now seemed full of hidden dangers. Every shadow could conceal an enemy, every rustle of leaves a potential threat. To cover more ground, the group split up. The separation brought a new level of tension, each team now more vulnerable without the other's support. Uncas and Hawkeye took one route, while Chingachgook and Hayward took another. The forest seemed to grow quieter, amplifying every snap of a twig underfoot, every labored breath. As they gained ground on Magua and his party, the landscape became increasingly perilous. They found themselves navigating through a series of narrow canyons where echoes played tricks on their ears and every shadow could hide an ambush. The walls of rock towered above them, making them feel small and exposed, like ants beneath the feet of giants. The chase led them to a series of high, rocky cliffs overlooking a deep gorge. The wind howled through the canyon like a mournful spirit, carrying with it the faint sounds of movement ahead. Suddenly, they spotted Magua and his captives ascending a treacherous path up the cliffside. Uncas, his heart pounding with a mixture of desperation and love, began a perilous climb to intercept them. His fingers found small crevices in the rock face, muscles straining with each upward movement. The height was dizzying, the drop below a yawning void that threatened to swallow him whole. Yet his focus remained unshakable, his determination as solid as the rock he climbed. Hawkeye and the others scrambled to find an alternate route up the cliff. The reality of their situation became painfully clear. There was nowhere left to run. The cliff top would be their battleground, with the unforgiving drop on all sides serving as a stark reminder of the stakes. The wind whipped around them as they climbed, carrying with it the promise of an impending storm. The sky darkened, mirroring the gravity of the moment. Dark clouds rolled in, casting long shadows across the landscape. With each step closer to the summit, the inevitability of the coming confrontation weighed heavily on them all. As they neared the top, the wind's howl became deafening. Loose rocks skittered down the cliff face, a grim reminder of how precarious their position was. Uncas reached the summit first, his silhouette stark against the turbulent sky. He stood there for a moment, a lone figure poised on the edge of destiny. The others joined him, panting and battle-ready. They could see Magua now, his face twisted with malice, Cora struggling in his grasp. The air crackled with tension, like the moment before lightning strikes. As both sides faced each other on that windswept peak, the storm finally broke. A deafening crack of thunder shook the very ground beneath their feet, and in that instant, the final battle began. The final confrontation unfolds on the treacherous cliffs, a battle of life and death. Uncas, his heart pounding with determination and fear, leads a desperate charge to save Cora. The air crackles with tension, heavy with the scent of pine and the metallic tang of fear. Loose stones skitter underfoot as Uncas and Magua face each other, their eyes locked in a fierce glare. They circle one another like wolves, muscles coiled tight as springs, ready to unleash at any moment. Suddenly they clash in a blur of motion. The clang of metal on metal pierces the air, echoing off the rocky walls. Uncas moves with the fluid grace of his ancestors, each strike precise and purposeful. Magua counters with cunning born of years of battle, his experience evident in every calculated move. For a breathless moment, it seems Uncas might prevail. He presses Magua back, his youthful vigor giving him an edge. The young warrior's heart soars with hope, his spirit buoyed by the thought of rescuing Cora. But fate, cruel and capricious, has other plans. In the blink of an eye, the tide turns. Magua faints, a subtle shift that draws Uncas off balance. Time slows to a crawl as Magua's blade flashes in the dim light, finding its mark with deadly precision. Uncas falls, his eyes wide with shock and pain. The world around him blurs, the sounds of battle fading to a dull roar. His last thoughts are of his father, his people, and the woman he fought so desperately to save. Cora's anguished cry pierces the air, a sound of pure despair that seems to shatter the very rocks around them. Grief overwhelms her, clouding her mind and dulling her senses. She stumbles backward, her foot slipping on the treacherous edge. Before anyone can react, she plummets from the cliff. Her form grows smaller as she falls into the misty depths below, swallowed by the unforgiving wilderness that has claimed so many lives. The battlefield falls silent, save for the whisper of the wind and the distant cry of a lone bird. It's as if nature itself pauses to acknowledge the tragedy that has unfolded. Hawkeye arrives, his weathered face a mask of anguish as he takes in the scene. Years in the wilderness have honed his instincts, and his hand is steady as he raises his rifle. The shot rings out, clear and true, echoing across the cliffs. Magua crumples, his reign of terror finally at an end. The remaining Huron warriors, seeing their leader fall, melt away into the forest like shadows fleeing the dawn. They disappear into the thick underbrush, leaving behind the bitter taste of defeat and loss. In the aftermath, a heavy sorrow settles over the survivors. They gather to bid farewell to Uncas, performing the sacred rites of his people. Chingachgook stands tall, his face etched with grief as he mourns not just his son, but the end of his lineage. The weight of generations seems to rest on his shoulders, bowing him under its immense burden. Hawkeye, ever loyal, remains by his side. No words are spoken between them, but their shared grief forms a bond stronger than blood. They stand together, two men who have seen too much death, yet find the strength to endure. Alice, her face pale and drawn, finds solace in Hayward's embrace. Their shared ordeal has forged a connection between them, a flicker of light in the darkness of their loss. They cling to each other, finding comfort in the warmth of human touch amidst the cold reality of their situation. Colonel Monroe, once proud and strong, now seems diminished. The loss of both his daughters weighs heavily upon him, etching deep lines of sorrow into his face. He stands apart from the others, a man adrift in a sea of grief too vast to comprehend. As the group prepares to leave this place of sorrow, they carry with them the weight of all they have witnessed. The frontier, once a place of adventure and possibility, now seems tinged with sadness and uncertainty. The wind whispers through the trees, carrying with it the echoes of lives lost and dreams shattered. Hawkeye and Chingachgook exchange a look of understanding. Though the Mohican line may end with Uncas, his spirit will live on in the wilderness they both call home. With heavy hearts but resolute spirits, they vow to honor his memory in the life they will continue to lead in the untamed lands. The survivors begin their journey back to civilization, forever changed by their experiences in the untamed frontier. The wilderness stretches out before them, a silent witness to their sorrow and their strength. Each step takes them further from the tragedy they've endured, yet the memories will remain etched in their hearts forever. As they make their way through the dense forest, the first rays of dawn break through the canopy. The golden light paints the leaves in hues of amber and emerald, a reminder that even in the darkest times, beauty can still be found. It's a bittersweet moment, filled with both hope and melancholy. They move forward towards an uncertain future, carrying with them the lessons learned in the wilderness. The frontier has tested them, broken them, and ultimately forged them anew. Though they leave behind the graves of those they loved, they carry forward the strength and resilience born of their trials. The last of the Mohicans may have fallen, but his legacy lives on in the hearts of those who knew him and in the very land itself. As the survivors disappear into the forest, the wilderness seems to whisper a final farewell, a promise that their story will not be forgotten.
This book was generated using Speaktor's AI voices. You can create human-like voiceovers in over 50 languages.